Hi everybody. My name is Kimberly Van Ginkel. I'm going to be doing a author reading in a few minutes. I'm just going to wait until we've had a chance for a few more people to hop on. So if you're watching this on tape delay later, you might want to skip forward about 3 or 4 minutes. My instructions are to just sit here quietly until it's time to start, but anybody who knows me knows that I can't sit quietly. So I'm just going to keep talking until it's time to get going, if that's okay. Hi there. I do want to say thank you to GenZ for putting this on. They're doing a series of virtual Meet the Author events this spring and summer, and they're pretty cool that you ought to check out. I know we have a number of really neat books coming out. I've seen some of the fantasy books that are coming out, and I'm very excited about all of them. And especially my own, but you know, they're all really cool. So thanks everybody for coming. We're just going to wait a few more minutes before we get started. Cool. So like I said, I'm just going to keep talking for a couple minutes until it's time to actually start the reading. But this is just a virtual author event. My name's Kimberly, and I'm going to be reading my book that came out last week, which is In the Sleep of Death. It's a historical fantasy set in 1886 Midwest, and I'm pretty proud of it. I feel silly not talking. I am no good at all at not talking. Cool. Okay. About another minute, and then we'll start the reading. So, oh, thank you so much. Somebody said congratulations out there. Thank you so much. I haven't ever done an Instagram Live before, so I'm going to have a hard time not just reading every comment. So definitely comment, and also put comments if you have questions, and if I don't see your question, go ahead and put them in the comments on the Instagram post, and I'll answer them after we're off the air. Might as well be promoting it while I've got it out. This is the book we're going to be reading from today, In the Sleep of Death. And I wonder if I can, without getting my finger right in the way of everything. Okay, good. It's a little bit after 5 o'clock. We can get going. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Hope that's okay. So this is the book, In the Sleep of Death. My name is Kimberly Van Ginkel. It came out last week, and it's available in paperback and ebook. So we'll put the link to it on the bottom of this. I'm going to go ahead and get started doing a reading from the first chapter. Sorry about this. I should have prepped first. Okay. Chapter 1, June 14th, 1886. She watched the men of the posse milling about in the darkness, like phantoms along the outskirts of the campfire. They had been ordered to spread out with their bedrolls in case she tried to run. They needn't have bothered. Fatigue had already dug its claws into her. "Stay awake, Lorena," begged that familiar voice in the depths of her mind. Raising her chin ever higher, she sat stiff-backed and proud, legs crossed demurely at the ankles, as though serving tea in her mother's parlor, rather than perched on an overturned crate somewhere on the barren plains. Prisoner or not, Lorena Edelwolf was a well-born lady, and intended to be treated as such. The haughtiness that came second nature to her now also appeared to be a good tactical choice. Most of these local rubes knew just enough about polite society to realize they were not well equipped to function in it. A few well-chosen words left them fumble-footed and backing away like disobedient servants. She sensed their fear as well. The newspapers branded her the Hellfire Witch of St. Louis. which set every home in the state abuzz with differing versions of her exploits. The one thing everyone agreed upon is that if you were fool enough to look straight at her, she'd curse you with the evil eye. Little wonder, then, that the men scampered off as soon as they erected her tent, leaving her with only her 2 traveling companions and George for company. From the way the others deferred to him, she pegged George as their leader. Unfortunately for her, he seemed unfazed by her reputation. Clearly a different breed, this one didn't falter when he spoke to her, but held her gaze steadily. Indeed, his eyes rarely left hers. It wouldn't do to encourage his attentions by staring back, so Lorena scrutinized him over the rim of her goblet as she pretended to sip her wine. Though the men guzzled applejack, she'd been presented with the prime pickings of their larder, a burgundy so dark it tasted of vinegar and reeked like a bloodletting. Her stomach twisted at the scent. In her moment of distraction, George caught her eyes lingering on him and returned a bold wink. Clad in a homespun shirt and blue-striped slacks, with a short-barrel peacemaker thrust through his belt, he eyed her with a possessive smirk that would have scandalized her Eastern society friends. But the palpable lust was not for her body. She could practically see the silver dollars tallying in his mind. Within a day's ride, they would reach the St. Louis Sheriff's Office, and George and his gang would collect the bounty before she took her first proud step onto the gallows. At the moment, she had more pressing concerns. Better to face an enemy outright than one masquerading as an ally. Across the fire from her, Giles Colcoit, her late husband's apprentice, twisted his lanky body to sit cross-legged like a soggy pretzel as he sucked at his long 9 cigar. When he grinned, he reminded her of a ferret. Perhaps it was the brown snaggletooth tucked over his lower lip, or the way he raked his thinning hair over his dirt-smeared forehead. Lorena sighed, thinking what a shame that she had fallen dependent on this intractable bastard. Her young servant, Beau, appeared with a long stick with which to stoke the fire. He worked in silence, so close to the flames that his dark skin glowed orange. Without turning his head, he swept the goblet from her hand and poured the wretched wine over the outermost embers to keep George from noticing that Lorena was wasting her portion of the provisions. "Dear, sweet Beau." When he finished, squatting on his haunches by her side, Lorena discreetly patted his shoulder. Her fingers lingered on the frayed collar of what in better days had been Beau's Sunday suit. The only remaining link to her home, he shone as a beacon of faith and loyalty in this fetid landscape of scalawags and sinners. Her husband's words, "Mein Treuer," echoed in her ear as clearly as if he was standing beside her now. That was his pet name for her, a phrase that translated to "my faithful one." It occurred to her now that her devotion to her beloved Deirdre mirrored Beau's constancy to her. A flash of insight showed her how she could fulfill her husband's final request. The promise of serenity bowed before her, even as she shivered under the horrifying image of what she must do. "If you're cold, ma'am," George drawled, "I could call for more wood for the fire." "Spare me your concern, sir. I am quite well." Beau sprang to his feet. "I'll fetch more anyhow, Miss Lorena." She turned to watch him scamper off, amused that whereas Colcoit's inane grin never flickered, Beau had so nimbly caught the social nuances. Under her tutelage, Beau had become well educated in mannerly chit-chat, the art of hiding ugly meaning beneath polite words. When George expressed concern for her comfort, he was letting her know how closely he was watching her, that even her slight shiver was catalogued in his mind. Her direct rebuff of any act of kindness from her captor was bold enough that even Beau caught the lady's disdain and stepped in before the man could take offense. And when Beau returned, laden with scrub brush, and resumed his vigil at her side, she murmured, "Thank you, Beau. You'll never know how grateful I am." Her benign words became Beau's eulogy, for she had just resolved to murder him before sunrise. It's the end of chapter 1. I'm going to go on, but because I started a little bit early, I'm going to back up and tell everybody just coming in. This is the first chapter of In the Sleep of Death, and I'm Kimberly Van Ginkel. And I'm going to go on just a little bit further, and then we'll take some questions. Chapter 2, 3 months previous. Until the precise instant the Germans schismed her world into conflicting forces of passion and manic compulsion, young Lorena Whitaker was the model of a spirited post-war debutante. "Girls, is that you on the veranda?" That 5-second warning transformed two girls of leisure into their mother's concept of modest ladies. Lorena's kid boots, which had been curled beneath her on the serpentine back sofa, met the floor with a thump. Her younger sister Viola discreetly spat the mint leaf she'd been chewing into the shrubbery lining the porch. A borrowed copy of Dr. Faustus made its way from Lorena's hands to the bottom of a pile of throw pillows. By the time Mrs. Whittaker burst through the French doors, both girls were sitting upright and proper, their hands occupied with the ongoing embroidery projects. Their mother despised idle hands, even while they were enjoying the first spring day warm enough to rest on the porch without a shawl. Built atop a hill that overlooked all of downtown Allegheny, Pennsylvania, the Whittaker home, with its ornate Indian red gimcrackery and lavender cupolas, captured the eye of every passerby. Snuggled in amongst the opulence, the fashionable Whittaker girls loved relaxing outside to avail themselves of impromptu visits from any friend or gossip stoker on her way home along Ridge Avenue. Their mother approved of the socializing, provided her poised and polished ladies proved to the world that they were not work-shy. By her standards, that meant an almost constant burden of sewing, knitting, tatting, and other ladylike frippery. Lorena had barely poked her needle through a random spot in the fabric when Mrs. Whittaker spotted them. "There you are! I've been calling all through the house for you. Upstairs now and dress for dinner. Your father just sent word that he's bringing a businessman home tonight." Once a carefree Southern belle, Mrs. Whittaker now sported a perpetual frown and worry lines, though no grays were yet visible in the tightly drawn bun at the nape of her neck. Lorena watched her mother's nervous hands clinking the chain of her crucifix back and forth over the strands of beads around her ruffled neckline. "Someone we know?" Viola asked. Her mother avoided her eyes. "No, a new acquaintance, one he hopes to impress." Color rose in Viola's cheeks as she ventured, "I'll change into my brown muslin." "You will wear your new lavender dinner gown," Mrs. Whittaker snapped. "Your father wishes us to dress to the nines, especially you." "Oh!" With an inarticulate howl, Viola stomped into the house and slammed the door. Mrs. Whittaker glanced quickly at the neighboring porches to see whether anyone important had witnessed the tantrum. As Lorena swept past her mother in the entryway, she muttered, "You might at least allow her to retire early with a headache. Your father knows what's best for all of us." Lorena paused with her hand on the banister of the grand staircase before replying thoughtfully, "You say that so frequently, Mother. I wonder whether you would repeat it so emphatically if you truly believed it." Mrs. Whittaker, renowned for being Mr. Whittaker, renowned for being a shrewd financier, often reminded Lorena that she enjoyed a life of affluence solely because he'd been astute enough to sell his Carolina plantation and reinvest his profits in the expanding steel industry in the North. Privately, however, she found him a bit too cold and calculating, particularly in the way he carefully allocated his daughters. Her oldest sister, Grace, headlined the social pages for months when she wed a genuine U.S. congressman. The next girl, Mabel, became daughter-in-law to the second-largest banking institution in Philadelphia. Anna, the fourth girl, united his family with the coal mine that supplied Mr. Whittaker's steel mills. And although Viola, the baby child, mooned over a boy whose financial prospects were unmentionable, it did nothing to daunt his nuptial scheming. Lorena took her time dressing for dinner, her primary concern being to stay out of the way of the spectacle attending to Viola. Two Polish serving girls worked to braid fresh flowers into Viola's hair, while her mother looked on from the bench in the center of the dressing room. All the while, Viola scowled at her pretty reflection in the mirror. "That's it, you've hit upon it," teased Lorena. "If you can manage to keep that expression plastered on throughout dinner, this Romeo might forget about your inheritance." "Just you wait," Viola hissed, her eyes blazing with tears. "After I'm married off, he'll turn on you next." Lorena wisely kept her tongue in cheek, despite the parade of witty rejoinders that came to mind. She'd eavesdropped on her parents enough to know they'd given her up as an old maid by her 26th birthday. Miss Lorena was generally said to be just as attractive as the other girls, if a bit darker of features and less in need of the prominent bustle that padded the rumps of modern women. Her milk and honey complexion offset her dark chestnut eyes. Every bristle of her coarse black hair settled into place like an oil painting. A calmer demeanor could rarely be found. On the surface, she would have made an ideal bride. Her defect lay in her love of learning. After finishing school, she'd insisted on hiring local professors as her private tutors. Only literature and arts at first, then more of the masculine tracks as, year upon year, she craved a fresh challenge. It had seemed to Mr. Whittaker like a harmless diversion to keep her occupied and single until he ready to match. But the sweet young thing began speaking her mind in mixed company, contradicting any man she disagreed with, and even unrepentantly boasting that she was better educated than any young man in the county. One embarrassed suitor after another balked or was given the boot, until even Mr. Whittaker was forced to concede that perhaps not every woman was suited for marriage. Her sisters confided to her that they wished they'd have caught on to this trick. Being raised as pampered china dolls had not prepared them to take a lord and master. Anna, in particular, had it so tough that when the labor bill passed that gave her husband a half holiday each Saturday, she stopped speaking to her congressman brother-in-law. Lorena remained quite content to languish in spinsterhood until the arrival of the enigmatic German. The fuss over Viola continued until the ladies heard carriage bells clang in the drive below. "Stop!" Viola screeched. She grabbed both serving girls by the wrist, pulling them to the window so she could peek through the curtains. Lorena took advantage of the vacancy at the mirror to adjust her own hairpins. After a moment, one of the girls giggled, though the other emitted a series of choked snorts, trying not to laugh aloud. Viola turned back into the room with a radiant smile. "He's old! Mama, you must have misunderstood. Papa brought a little old man home for dinner." Mrs. Whittaker abandoned propriety to run to the window herself. Land sakes! After she'd gotten a good eyeful, she returned to her youngest daughter with a broad, relaxed grin and cupped a gloved hand around Viola's soft cheek. Viola glowed at the sign, however muted and restrained, that her mother might not be quite ready to have her last married off. "That's quite enough adornment for her hair," Mrs. Whittaker told the working girls, who still had their hands full of braids as they followed Viola back to her bench. "Tie it off quickly. We must meet our guest." Lorena linked arms with her sister for the long walk through the upper hall. They dutifully pinched their cheeks for color and donned their best artificial smiles. Mr. Whittaker stood in the foyer, appraising his ladies as they descended the staircase. His left hand fumbled with his pocket watch, struggling to reinsert it in the vest pocket that rode taut over his well-fed belly. Greeting his wife with a kiss on the hand, her father exuded his sunniest manners, but Lorena sensed he was a mite embarrassed by the shrunken creature trailing in his wake. Something just shy of Methuselah, the newcomer shuffled in wearing an expensive, stiffly starched suit, to the odd effect that it was the old man who looked as though he'd shrunken in the wash and needed a good ironing. He supported his weight against a gold-tipped walking stick clutched in his white hand. Dusky gray hair hung over his ears, as though he hadn't met a pair of shears in months, though his mustache and beard were manicured to a stiff point. Through a pince nez perched askew on his crooked nose, his blue-gray eyes scanned the room, lingering on nothing until the Whittaker women gathered before him. His hands trembled noticeably as he removed his top hat. "Mr. Diedrich Edelwolf," his host began, "allow me to present my wife, Mrs. Rose Bradwell Whittaker, of the Savannah Bradwells." Before Mrs. Whittaker could speak, the man corrected, "Master Edelwolf." Lorena saw her mother's lips purse at this exalted form of address, and knew they'd all share a hearty laugh over it at the breakfast table the next morning. Too well bred to contradict her guest, Mrs. Whittaker handled the situation neatly by lapsing into her sweetest Southern belle accent. "Master Edelwolf, we are delighted you could join us this evening." "It gives me great pleasure, Frau Whittaker." Edelwolf spoke with such a thickly layered Germanic accent that Mrs. Whittaker paused, her lips moving slightly as she mentally translated his speech, before she smiled again. Yes, of course, and these beauties are my daughters, Viola and Lorena." Lorena dropped a curtsy a beat behind her sister. The butler stepped forth to take the gentlemen's hats as well as Edelwolf's voluminous traveling cloak. Right on cue, the cook rescued them from aimless chit-chat by announcing dinner. "Miss Lorena Whittaker, may I escort you inside?" Edelwolf asked. Lorena thought she might fall through the floor. Unable to speak and mindful of everyone's eyes upon her, she gingerly took his arm, and together they sauntered unsteadily over the threshold. I'm going to stop there. That was the first 2 chapters of In the Sleep of Death. I am really plugging this, but I'm sorry. I'm really, really proud of it. It came out just last week, and it is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you look online. You can get paperback or ebook. And that's the end of the reading. I'm going to take any questions that we've got. I've seen a couple flip up, so I'm going to try to go back and see them. If I miss your question, put it in the comments at the bottom of this, and I'll get to it afterwards. So I saw a couple of questions run through. Let's see. What inspired you to become an author? Okay, so I was always the kid that had my nose in a book. To this day, if I run into any of my grade school teachers, they remember two things about me. One, I never spoke, ever. And two, I always had a book in my hands. And I was the kind that in between, going from one room to another, it was this the entire time. So I think when you've got that much of a love of books, and books are that much of your life, it's just a natural thing to want to give back and add one of your own creation to all of this. I see another question of what inspired me to write this book. Two answers to that. One is the phrase "in the sleep of death" is it's a line in Hamlet's soliloquy, and I had to memorize it for a class. In the sleep of death, what dreams may arise after we have shuffled off this mortal coil. And I always loved that line, and it made me wonder just how close dreams and how close the whole afterlife is to dreams. And so this is kind of a way of intertwining the two of those. The other answer is this. I absolutely adore Alan Rickman, who played Snape in the Harry Potter movies. And when my daughter was young, we all read all of the Harry Potter books. And we hated Snape, of course, because you were supposed to. But then when we started watching the movies, it was Alan Rickman, and he's so cool. It made me wonder, what would happen if you fell in love with a dark wizard? With somebody who had ensnared you through magic? Would you stay in love with him? Would you fight against it? So this is really, without giving away too much, it's a story of a girl who falls in love with a man who may be involved in some pretty dark magic, and it's kind of explores that whole thing. This is good. Two questions that are kind of the same. How often do I write, and can I discuss my writing process? So like most people, I have a full-time job. I've got a family that I like to spend time with. It is hard to fit in time to do it. So this really was my lunch hour book. I discovered at one point that, the rest of my day might be taken up with other people, but lunch hour is one time I've got to myself. So for the last several years, if you had seen me over my lunch hour, you'd have seen me real quick running through a drive-through and then sitting either in my car or on a park bench and writing every bit of this. This one took, since it's set in 1886, it took a lot of research. So the local library got to know me really well, and about every 2 weeks I'd come home with a stack of books that I could pull out for research. So I was doing that every night. As I was falling asleep, I was reading more research books. Let's see, what else? I saw another one I'm going to try to flip back to from a little bit earlier. Who are some of my biggest influences? So I am kind of all over the place as far as the books that I like to read. Whenever I'm stressed and really needing to escape, that's when I fall back into fantasy and sci-fi. Terry Pratchett is number one on my list. Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams, I've read every one of their books a million times. More modern fantasy and sci-fi would be Joe Abercrombie. I am obsessed with him right now. Connie Willis, Diana Wynne Jones, love everything that they've done. On the other hand, the other thing that I tend to alternate with is classics, especially books from the late 1800s. So Jane Austen, L.M. Montgomery, Thomas Hardy, love all of those. So everything that I write tends to be a little bit of along the lines of the classics and a little bit along the lines of the more amusing fantasy. And so that's why I set this one in 1886, so I could really easily blend those two together. One book that I've heard it compared to before, and I hope I live up to it because I absolutely love this book, is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Absolutely love that. And this is kind of that book if it was set in the American Midwest in 1886. Let's see. Let me find another question here because I'm actually enjoying this. I got to tell you, I was so nervous coming onto this. I wasn't sure if I'd be anything good at this, but I am having so much fun with all of these remarks coming back. Do I have anything else in the works? Yes, I have 2 books. I don't like talking too much about them until I get them out into the world. But I've got a couple. I've got a fantasy book that I'm working on, and I've got a sci-fi book that's in progress that you'll probably hear me talking about in a year or 2. It takes me a while. As I said, I do most of my writing over the lunch hour. It takes me quite a while to actually get a book from start to finish. Let's see. What do I... Oh, yeah, somebody asked me this one in the very beginning, and I jotted it down. Do I look up reviews of my novels, and how do I handle positive or negative feedback? Okay, so everybody in the writing world will tell you, never read any reviews of your own books on Amazon. But let's be real. Of course I'm going to. Of course we're all going to, because I've been living with these characters for years now and just dying to tell people about them. And now it's finally out there and published, and people are wanting to talk to me about them, and I'm going to read every word anybody ever says about it. So please, 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 drop a review. Tell me what you like and what you didn't like about it. I'm fortunate that so far they've all been very positive reviews. I know eventually every book, there's eventually going to be a bad review because nobody likes every book. That's one reason that I always recommend to new writers to join a critique group. I've been part of a writing group for the last 10 years that read aloud and share back and forth, and I think it's helped quite a bit that we try to nurture each other, but you're still gonna every once in a while get those oh no, that didn't work for me at all, and then you go home and you rewrite the whole thing and you come back and you try it again. And I think that sort of thing really builds up your confidence and also allows you to take a little bit more criticism in your writing. Let's see, do I outline? Yes. Every book, like the first couple of chapters, I have no idea. I'm just pantsing it. I'm just seat of my pants is the phrase there, and just seeing where it goes. But I love outlining. And my day job is I'm IT and I'm a computer programmer, and that's so you can understand. I really love the structure of it. So what I tend to do is I'll outline in very broad strokes that gives me enough room to keep wiggling and exploring as I go. Let's see. Oh, hold on. I'm gonna try to swing down to keep asking questions, guys. I'm loving this. What is the hardest part of writing, editing, publishing for me? Okay. So I really enjoy the writing part. I love the editing part, which nobody ever says, but it's true. I love the editing part. The part that I have found the hardest so far is this. It's the talking about it. It's the going up to people and saying, "Psst, buy my book." Is really, really hard for me. And it's partially because I'm not a very social person. Like I said, I'm a computer geek. I don't do well talking about myself very often. But my sister told me something the other day, which is I need to talk about this as though it was my mom talking about my book, because my mom has told everybody in the Tri-County area about this book already. And I've set it down. And you know, I am such an avid reader. Every single time I pick up a book that I like, it kind of becomes my mission in life to pass it on to somebody else that's going to love it. So like the first time I read The Martian, for example, it became a goal of mine that I was not going to set the book down after I finished it until I found somebody else that loved it as much as I did. And I had a friend at work, and he doesn't even read sci-fi, but I was so convinced he was going to love it that I would stalk him and leave it at his desk going, you just got to read the first chapter during your lunch hour. You got to try it. So I'm kind of a nut that way, but I'm going to find another home for every book that I love. So I'm trying my best to do that with my own book, of saying, okay, guys, it's a really good book. You're really going to like it, without being pushy. But here's going to be my shot. If you enjoy historical fantasy, I think you'll like it. If you like kind of not really a romance, but if you like a romance story that isn't going to follow the rules of romance, then I'm hoping that you're going to like it. Oh, sorry, the title again is In the Sleep of Death, and you can find it on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com, and I'm going to put the links at the bottom of this when we're all done too. Let's see. I could just keep talking. This is crazy how much I'm talking right now. What other, I'd love any other questions. Let's see, I had another one that I jotted down at the beginning so I wouldn't forget it, and now I'm trying to find where I put it at. What, if anything, did I learn about myself in the process of writing? Okay. This is not one I got to do. This is one I got on an interview the other day, and I jotted it down because I don't know. It's kind of my mission. If I can help anybody else with this, I will. So I spent quite a while writing this. I went through several drafts. I had the entire first draft written before I took it into my writers group to kind of get their feedback on it. And what everybody said to me is that they really liked the concept of the story at that point, but what they didn't like is they're like, your characters, I just don't understand their motivation. And that seemed really strange to me because, to me it's very simple. Like, he's got a gun to her head, so of course this is her motivation. Or, this person is threatening to kill her, so of course this is her motivation. And so it took me a while to go back and rewrite it all and put more of the character's thoughts and feelings in it. And it took me, and as soon as I did, the response to it was completely different. People were like, oh yeah, I really like what she was doing in this part, or, I really understand this or that. But I realized that, as a storyteller, you have to do that because people aren't, you watch a movie just to watch what happens, but you read a book to be in the story and to be part of what's going on, and you want to feel the same things that the characters are feeling. But what I realized about myself is, my goodness, that's what I've done my entire life. I have just assumed that people would understand if this happens, then I'm going to act like this, because in my mind that's logical. Like, oh, my boss chewed me out this morning, so of course I'm going to be uptight all day. Or oh, my car didn't start, so of course this is going to happen. And I don't think I ever realized that you need that communication. I'm just not a very good social person. So rewriting this again and explaining the characters a little bit more has made me intentionally in my life explain to people, oh no, I'm feeling this way because of this, and having them all put it together. I don't know. It's one of those things, as I say it out loud, I realize that everyone else in the world just automatically knows these things, but it's something that takes me decades to figure out that that's how people actually talk to each other. I'm going to go back to a different question because I feel like a fool for answering that one. Let's see. Do I work on one book at a time? No, never. I always have multiple things going on. Right now I have a book that, I had written the entire thing, but I didn't really like it, so I'm rewriting it all. Just call it the third draft of it. So my goal is to finish that one by the end of the year, and then I've got another one that I don't have it all plotted out yet. I've only got about 100 pages written on it, and so I kind of alternate between the two of them. Every time I get to a blocking place on one, or a place where, I have to stop and really research this for a while, I'll start working on the other one during my research phase. I am kind of a nut for research. In fact, I should plug, I've got a website. It's just my name. It's KimberlyVanGinkel.com. And I am so into research that every time I run across something really crazy, I try to blog about it and share these crazy little bits that I'm learning. Mainly history, a little bit of technology, and I throw that all in there. Do I edit as I go, or do I bring in an editor at some point? So I am a big believer in editing as I go. I can't possibly not. It drives me crazy to not have it really polished. So I will usually do for every given chapter, a really sloppy first chapter that never sees the light of day. Nobody else will ever see that one. I'll take a couple more passes at it to really polish it before I show it to anybody. Usually at that point I'll take it to my writers group and let them see it, and then take their feedback and polish it a little bit more. I really shine this up before I even let the first person read it all the way through. I do want to talk about GenZ Publishing, who did this for me. They have amazing editors there. So we went through several rounds of editing on this, which, I think that's true of every book, but I'm just kind of want to give everybody there a shout out because the editors were really pointing out some great things, I thought, as far as just little nuances of characters. Let's see, trying to go through the rest of these. Do I write longhand or totally on the computer? Oh no, I write everything longhand. I'm trying. I know people who say that they will only ever write on the computer, but my first draft, if I'm not alone, just me and my notebook, then if I'm sitting on a computer, pretty soon I'm going to be pulling up Twitter, I'm going to decide to look something up, and then I go down a rabbit hole of research. The first draft has to be on a notebook for me. That's the only way I have the discipline to do it. Let's see. Oh, I think, oops, I've got one more. I'm trying to figure out, sorry everybody. That's a great question. How did I get the confidence to write a period piece? Wow. You know, I don't know that I ever felt confident about it. I just researched and researched and researched until I made sure that I had everything fitting in there. One thing though, this is kind of why I made it a period piece. Well, for one, it's a fantasy, and there's a lot going on with it that would be solved in modern day by having the internet or having a phone. So I had to set it in the past just for the sake of the story. I set it in the Midwest because I'm a girl from the Midwest. My family. Oh, excuse me a second. I'm losing my voice. I like to tell everybody that I'm 5th generation Iowan, meaning that my family has been in the Midwest since there, was a American Midwest to talk about. And Robert Heinlein is another one of my sci-fi guys that I just love. And he made a point, he didn't necessarily set all of his books in the Midwest because most of them were set in space, but he always had characters who were from the Midwest. And I decided I wanted to do that as well. I want all of my books to be strongly in the Midwest because that's my heart, that's where I'm from. And I am really into history myself. My husband was a history major. I'm very, very into genealogy, and I'm lucky that my family has saved little tidbits of so much from the 1800s. And it's kind of, for some reason, oops, shoot, I forgot to take that off. I'm sorry. I completely forgot to unplug it so that I wouldn't have that going on. My family has a lot of history and artifacts from the late 1800s, and I think that's why I've been so drawn to that over the years. Let's see. Where did Lorena come from? Is she somebody in history that I drew her from? No, totally fabricated. Lorena's very much me. She's very, she's not very good with interacting with other people. She speaks her mind a little bit too much. She's a little bit too aggressively feminist for the 1800s. She's very much me. Let's see. Do I research my ideas or do I get my ideas from research? I love that question. A little bit of both, really. There are a few, I don't know if I can come up with any examples top of my head, but there are several things where I just happened to be researching that period and I would find something really cool. I'm like, oh, I have got to use this. And so I'd find a way of fitting it in. Most of it started with, I knew that I wanted to be in St. Louis in the 1800s. And it started by going off with that. But then there's a lot that I discovered about St. Louis that I had never known before. And it just kind of all fit in perfectly. 1886 St. Louis was this, just a really fascinating place to me because you're right on the edge of high civilization. 1886 St. Louis, they had all the river boats. They had cable cars downtown for just a 10-year period. They had electricity. But if you went even 20 miles west, people were still living in huts. Everything to the west of St. Louis was traveling by horse, by stagecoach. It was still the Wild West out there. Everything east of St. Louis was trains and lights and everything you think of as Victorian. It was all happening. It was all kind of converging on St. Louis at that time. So I've really peppered this particular book with a million different things that I found. Like, for example, I had completely forgotten that was when Grover Cleveland got married. And it's just so cool to have the president getting married. So I had to slip that in there. And there's just a million different things. There's another one, something that became, I don't think this is a spoiler in any way. I'm trying to parse through my mind if it's going to be a spoiler to say it, but there's just south of St. Louis, there's something called the Cahokia Indian Mounds, which I hadn't heard about, even being from the Midwest. I hadn't heard about it until about 10 years ago, but it's these mounds of a huge city that of Midwestern Indians, and it was, I don't have it in my head exactly when it was big. Around 500 AD, I think. 500, 800 is when it was really the great time for that. But at the time, it was bigger than London, you know. But by the time that America was formed and we all started moving in, well, it had all been grown over. So it was an archaeological dig that discovered this amazing city had been buried just south of there. And I've never gotten a chance to go to Cahokia. I've got that on my to-do list for several years now, but I had to fit that in there. So that is actually one of the major, I don't want to give anything away, but one of the major scenes in this book is directly because of Cahokia and the Indian Mounds. Let's see. I'm kind of scrolling through to see if I got everybody's, to make sure that I'm getting all of the questions answered. Swinging on up there. Let's see. Did I have anything else? I think I'm going to run out of things to talk about, y'all. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'm enjoying this. I didn't know if I would or not, but I'm really enjoying all of these questions. Let's see. Geez, I'm kind of going through and I think I've answered everybody's questions. Well, hit me with anything else right now if you can think of anything, guys. But I'm really enjoying this, and I also want to say again, I really do appreciate GenZ and what they're doing. I have to say I've been guilty of this too. I haven't ever really looked at the catalogs that are coming out these days of the independent publishers. I guess until you're part of the publishing industry, you don't really stop and look at whether or not it's a mainstream or an indie publisher or anything. You just see in the book cover. But I am really telling people right now that it's amazing what is coming out of the independent book publishers, and especially the lineup that GenZ has this spring. The ones that I have gotten the chance to read already are really strong, really amazing, very provocative books. It's at least in the fantasy line. That's what I get to see. So I'm going to toss this up again, and thank you guys so much for joining in here. It's In the Sleep of Death. My name is Kimberly Van Ginkel. I'll put the links underneath this afterwards. And you can find the paperback or the ebook on Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, and we'll put the links up here. Thank you so much. I have had such a fun time.